Okay, so we're continuing on part 2 before the Anunnaki, and we was discussing chapter 5 went missing. And when I was talking to Jack the other day, we were talking about timelines. And again, when I do these things, I'm not debunking anybody's timelines, but what's happening is that the timelines, instead of them crashing into each other, causing absolute like devastating chaos, destruction, and death everywhere, they're merging. So there may be some death, unnoticeable things where people are just dying of sickness, infections, and stuff like that. But there's things that were on other people's timelines that aren't going to merge into what's called the permanent one timeline. But there will always be multiple timelines. It's just through when we go from one dimension, like the third dimension, into the 5 dimension, there's things that are in the third dimension that can't exist in the 5D. The 5D. That's why they call it a historical context. So what can't serve into the 5th dimension has to literally disappear into the 3D past dimensional era. So, and that's kind of what we're doing in this. So I, weirdly enough, I do believe that chapter 5 did not get put in there because it literally talks about the title of it is Did Tiamat and Apsu come to Earth? So, but we discovered that they were already here. And this is a really fun part for me, but yeah, I even printed the book. I displayed it for you guys, but chapter 5 is completely gone. So I'll have to get that reprinted. This one's just my what do you call it? The one that we look at before I post them up. So so yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get part 2 before the Anunnaki out, starting with chapter 5. And again, I'm sorry, Rusty, you can't follow on that one because it's not in the notes that I sent you. But it goes into it. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get into it. So chapter 5, did Tiamat and Apsu come to Earth? And again, for disclosure, I am not debunking anybody else's timelines. I am only here to merge the timelines, not crash them together, and figure out, through the puzzle pieces of disaster, how the 5D is going to, how we come into the 5D. So, as we continue exploring the generations before the Anunnaki, we eventually encounter one of the most frequently asked questions in modern discussion of Mesopotamian mythology. Were Apsu and Tiamat beings who came to Earth from somewhere else? Were they travelers from another world whose descendants eventually became known as the Anunnaki? Or do the oldest surviving texts tell a very different story? This is the point where our investigation must carefully separate the ancient evidence from later interpretations. Many modern books, documentaries, and internet discussions begin with the assumption that the earliest Mesopotamian gods were extraterrestrials, visitors arriving from a distant planet. While this idea has become deeply rooted in popular culture, it is important to ask a simpler question before accepting any conclusion. What do the oldest texts actually say? The answer is surprisingly straightforward. In the earlier Mesopotamian creation traditions, Apsu and Tiamat are not described as arriving on Earth because, in the story itself, there is not yet an organized Earth upon which they could arrive. Before mountains, before continents, before rivers, before kingdoms, and even before the separation of heaven and earth, the universe exists as a primordial state without the ordered world familiar to later generations. The sequence unfolds into its simplest form. The primordial state, where there's no heaven, no earth, equals Apsu, the primordial fresh water, meets Tiamat, the primordial salt water. The first generation of creation is then born. The ordered cosmos then collaborates. The later divine generations are now present. Which this cosmology, Apsu and Tiamat are not visitors entering creation. They are the conditions from which creation begins. They are the primordial waters themselves. Apsu embodies the deep freshwater abyss lying beneath the earth, while Tiamat represents the vast salt sea surrounding all things. Their existence precedes the formation of the structured universe, making them less like individual historical figures and more like living expressions of the fundamental forces that existed before order emerged. This distinction is subtle but profoundly important. If we read these stories through modern scientific thinking, we naturally imagine planets, oceans, and physical geography already existing. The Mesopotamian authors, however, described a reality before those distinctions have been established. Their universe begins in a state where everything is undifferentiated. Heaven has not yet been separated from earth, land has not yet emerged from the waters. The boundaries that define the physical world are still waiting to be formed. Viewed from the perspective asking whether Apsu and Tiamat came to Earth may be the wrong question altogether. Within the framework of the myth, they do not travel into creation. They are present before creation takes its recognized form. The ordered world develops through successive generations that descend from them, each generation introducing greater structure, distinction, and stability into the cosmos. This understanding also helps explain why water occupies such a central position in the earliest Mesopotamian worldview. Water was not simply one element among many, it represented the mysterious source from which all life emerged. The first divine genealogy, therefore, begins not with rulers or celestial kings, but with the eternal waters that sustain every living thing, long before temples, cities, and civilizations appeared. There existed only the fresh water deep and the boundless salt sea, whose union gave rise to the first generations of existence. As we examine these stories through the lens of archaeology and comparative mythology, another possibility begins to emerge. Perhaps the ancient storytellers were expressing profound observations about the natural world rather than attempting toward literal historical events. Every civilization is born where water permits life to flourish. Rivers nourish the lands, seas shape coastlines, springs emerge mysteriously from beneath the earth. To peoples whose survival depended entirely upon those forces, it was perfectly natural to imagine that creation itself began with living water. This idea mean later interpretation should simply be dismissed throughout history. Each generation has revisited ancient myths and interpreted them according to its own understanding of the universe. Some later readers envisioned Apsu, the Tiamat, as symbolic forces. Others viewed them as divine personalities. Still, others proposed that they represented advanced beings remembered through mythic language. These interpretations form part of the continuing history of Mesopotamian tradition, even when they move beyond what the earliest cuneiform tablets explicitly describes. For the purpose of this workbook, however, our goal is to begin with the oldest surviving evidence and then carefully distinguish it from later speculations. By doing so, we allow the ancient texts to speak in their own voice before considering now subsequent generations expanded, reinterpreted, or transformed their meaning. Perhaps the greatest lesson offered by Apsu and Tiamat is not that they came from another world, but that the earliest civilizations understood a timeline truth. Before there could be a kingdom, civilizations, laws, or even humanity itself, there had to be the waters from which all life would eventually emerge. Whether understood as sacred, symbolism, cosmological philosophy, or the poetic memory of an ancient people, the primordial waters remain the foundation upon which the entire Mesopotamian story is built. As we move forward into the next chapter, we will continue asking in an important question that lies at the heart of every ancient tradition. When later generations reinterpret the oldest stories, how much of the original memory remains and how much becomes a reflection of the age doing the retelling? Okay, let me grab my book now, because now we're going to chapter 6. Okay. So, chapter 6. But what if there was an even older tradition? As we continue peeling back the layers of humanity's oldest stories, an even more intriguing question begins to emerge. What if the Mesopotamian account of Apsu and Tiamat was not the beginning of the story, but rather one surviving branch of a tradition far older than the Sumer itself? Could the image of primordial waters have originated long before the first cities were built, preserved through countless generations before eventually finding its way into written history? The question lies at the heart of comparative mythology, a field that examines reoccurring themes shared among civilizations separated by vast distances, different languages, and thousands of years. Comparative mythology does not assume that every similarity proves direct contact between cultures, nor does it suggest that every civilization inherited the beliefs from a single source. Instead, it asks whether certain symbols that stories emerge because they reflect common human experience or preserves memories that they spread with migrating populations before written history begins. One of the most remarkable patterns found throughout the ancient world is the repeated appearance of water. At the very beginning of creation, although each civilization tells the story in its own unique way, the underlying imagery is strikingly familiar. Again and again, creation begins not upon dry land, but upon the endless expansion of water from which order gradually emerges. The recurring pattern can be illustrated as follows. Ancient Egypt into Nun, the infinite primordial water, into the first mound of land emerges, going into the ancient Mesopotamia, Apsu and Tiamat, fresh water, salt water, the first divine generations, Genesis, darkness was upon the face of the deep, the Spirit of God moves upon the waters, light and creation begin, Greek traditions, chaos, the ordering of heaven and earth, Hindu cosmology, the endless cosmic ocean, creation emerges through the divine. At first glance, these traditions appear remarkably different, yet each begins from a similar premise. Before there are mountains, forests, civilizations, kingdoms, or even humanity itself, there exists an undifferentiated state that is often described through the imagery of water, darkness, or limitless potential. The details vary from culture to culture, but the underlying symbolism remains surprisingly consistent. The Egyptians envisioned the beginning as none, the infinite waters stretching endless before the first hill of creation rose above the flood. For the Mesopotamians, the primordial state was embodied by Apsu and Tiamat, whose mingling gave rise to the generation that would eventually order the cosmos. The opening verses of the Genesis describe darkness covering the face of the deep, while the Spirit of God moves across the waters before light appears. Greek philosophers and poets began with chaos, not simply as disorder, but as an understanding that from which distinction the structure gradually emerged. In the ancient traditions of India, the universe rests upon an endless cosmic ocean from which creation unfolds through successive cycles of birth, preservation, and renewal. These simulations naturally invite an important question. Did all of these civilizations inherit fragments of one ancient story, or did they independently arrive at similar ideas because water universally symbolizes the source of life? Scholars continue to debate this question, and there is currently no consensus that every creation narrative descends from a single historical tradition. The evidence instead suggests that multiple influences were likely to work. Cultural exchange, undoubtful. Here they go. They're hitting my throat chakra. I was going to light a candle, but I can't find my lighter. Cultural exchange undoubtedly occurred throughout the ancient Near East, while at the same time, the universal importance of water made it a powerful and intuitive symbol for creation in many parts of the world. There is another possibility worth considering as well. If humanity experienced dramatic environmental changes near the end of the last ice age, memories of those transformations may have spread alongside migrating populations over thousands of years. Communities settling in different regions would gradually adapt those inherited memories to their own landscapes, language, and religious traditions. A story remembered in Mesopotamia might become countered upon rivers and floodplains, while the same underlying memory could become associated with the Nile in Egypt, the sacred oceans of India, or the deep waters described in the Hebrew scriptures. Over time, each culture would shape the tradition according to its own worldview while preserving a recognizable echo of the original theme. Whether the hypothesis ultimately proves correct remains uncertain, yet it reminds us that mythology is rarely static. Stories evolve as civilizations evolve. They absorb new ideas, respond to changing environments, and reflect the spiritual need of each generation that inherits them. The written texts we possess today, therefore, represent snapshots of traditions that were already ancient when they were first recorded on stone, papyrus, or clay. For this reason, the repeated appearance of primordial waters should not immediately be interpreted as evidence of extraterrestrial intervention or a forgotten planetary civilization. Such conclusion extends far beyond the available historical evidence. What the reoccurrence does demonstrate is something perhaps even more remarkable. Across continents and across millennia, humanity repeatedly imagined that life itself emerged from the mysterious, life-giving deep, which understood as sacred symbolism, philosophical reactions, environmental memory, or a combination of all three. Water became one of the oldest and most enduring metaphor through which civilization sought to explain the beginning of existence. As we move deeper into the generations before the Anunnaki, we should remember that our search is not simply for the origins of one civilization's myths or mythology. It is a search for the oldest memories humanity has preserved about itself. Somewhere beneath the stories of gods, floods, and primordial seas may rest fragmented of experiences shared by our distant ancestors, echoes carried forward through oral tradition until they became the foundation stones of civilization's earliest creation narratives. Chapter 7, the Nibiru Question. Few subjects within Mesopotamia to Mesopotamian studies have generated as much fascination and as much misunderstanding as the mysterious name Nibiru. During the past several decades, it has become almost impossible to discuss the Anunnaki without someone mentioning a hidden planet, an advanced extraterrestrial civilization, or an ancient race said to return to Earth every few thousand years. Popular books, documentaries, television programs, and countless internet discussions have transformed Nibiru into one of the most recognizable names in the alternative history. Yet, when we step back from modern interpretation and ask a much simpler question, what do the oldest Mesopotamian texts actually say? Again, the picture becomes considerably more complex. This is where the modern discussion often moves too quickly. Many people begin with the conclusion that Nibiru was another planet and then attempt to interpret every Mesopotamian story through that assumption. Historians and I can't pronounce this. Assyriologists, however, generally begin in the opposite direction. They first examine the surviving cuneiform tablets, compare how the word was used across different periods, and only then attempt to understand what ancient scribes meant by the name. Surprisingly, the oldest texts do not consistently describe Nibiru as a physical planet inhabited by the Anunnaki. In Babylonian astronomical writings, the word Nibiru appears to have referred to a crossing or crossing place, a term that could describe a celestial point, a particular bright star, or, in some texts, even the planet Jupiter. The meaning changes depending upon the document and the historical period in which it was written. What the surviving tablets do not clearly describe is a distant inhabited world from which Apsul, Tiamat, or the earliest generations of divine beings arrived. That observation raises an interesting possibility. What if later readers have been asking the wrong questions altogether? Suppose there truly was an extraordinary civilization remembered by the peoples of ancient Mesopotamia. Must that civilization necessarily have come from another planet? Or is it equally possible that the oldest memories described a remarkable human culture whose homeland has since disappeared beneath the sea, been abandoned after environmental catastrophe, or simply vanished from history long before written records began? Throughout history, unfamiliar people have often been remembered in extraordinary ways. Ancient societies frequently described powerful rulers as descendants of the gods, wise teachers as heavenly messengers, and distant kingdoms as lands inhabited by beings possessing knowledge beyond ordinary men. Such descriptions do not necessarily imply that those individuals were extraterrestrials. More often, they reflect the tendency of human memory to elevate exceptional people until history and legend become inseparable. Sorry, my papers are blowing away. Modern archaeology provides numerous examples of civilization that disappear so completely that only fragments remain for later generations to discover. Entire cities have been buried beneath deserts, swallowed by forests, or submerged beneath rising seas. When their descendants attempt to explain these vanished places centuries later, myth naturally filled the gaps left by fading memories. It is therefore worth asking whether some of the oldest Mesopotamian traditions preserve memories of forgotten cultures rather than visiting from another world. Imagine a coastal civilization flourishing near the end of the last ice age. As sea levels gradually rose, portions of that homeland disappeared beneath advanced waters. Survivors migrated inland, carrying with them knowledge of agricultural, astronomy, navigation, irrigation, and monumental construction. To the inland people who encountered them generations later, these newcomers would have appeared remarkably advanced. Their leaders might have been remembered not simply as skilled humans, but as founders, culture bringers, or even divine ancestors whose wisdom seemed beyond ordinary experience. As centuries passed, the distinction between historical individuals and symbolic figures would naturally become blurred. A respected leader might become remembered as the embodiment of a river. A guardian of coastal communities might eventually become associated with the sea itself. Clan identities, occupations, and territorial responsibilities often evolve into personal titles, and over many generations, those titles can become the names of legendary ancestors. Even in more recent history, we see similar patterns. Many indigenous cultures throughout the world identify themselves through clan systems connected to the natural world. A person belonging to the bear clan, wolf clan, eagle clan, or turtle clan is not claiming literal descent from those animals, but expressing ancestral identity, kingship, responsibility, and relationship to the landscape. The title itself communicates far more than biology. It tells a story about where a people belonged and the role they fulfilled within their society. Applying that perspective to the earliest Mesopotamian tradition opens another possibility. What if names such as Apsu, Tiamat, Enki, or even later figures associated with rivers, marshes, or seas once represented ancestral houses, sacred offices, or communities whose identities became inseparable from the water upon which they depended? In modern language, we might easily understand such identities as something remembering river clan, sea clan, marsh clan, or mountain clan. Over thousands of years of oral tradition, descriptive titles could gradually become remembered as the names of primordial beings themselves. This possibility remains speculative, and no surviving cuneiform tablets explicitly states that these divine names originated as clan designations or historical lineage. Nevertheless, anthropology repeatedly demonstrated that society after preserve ancient social identities through symbolic language long after their original context has been forgotten. What begins as a community relationship to its landscape may eventually become the foundation of sacred mythology. This perspective also offers an interesting way to think about family traditions and genealogies. Throughout history, royal houses, priestly families, and tribal lineage have frequently traced their ancestry to legendary founders whose stories blended history, symbolism, and theology. Whether those founders were understood as literal historical individuals, honored ancestors, or mythic archetypes depends largely upon the culture preserving the tradition. A genealogy that reaches back to figures such as Enlil, therefore, can be viewed in several ways as a symbolic lineage expressing cultural identity, as a traditional ancestral memory preserved through generations, or as part of the sacred narrative connecting later families to the foundation stories of Mesopotamia. Distinguishing among those possibilities requires careful historical analysis because the surviving evidence does not allow us to confirm a direct biological descent from figures who function as deities within the ancient texts. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the Nibiru question is not whether an ancient civilization came from another planet, but how easily history can become transformed by the passing of time. Every generation inherits stories from those who came before. Some details are preserved with remarkable accuracy, while others of airship by imagination, belief, and the desire to explain mysteries whose original context has long been forgotten. By the time those stories are finally written down, they often contain layers of memory accumulated across thousands of years. As we continue this investigation, it may be helpful to remember that history rarely presents us with simply choices between fact and fiction, more than it offers a tapestry woven from archaeology, oral traditions, environmental change, cultural identity, and human imagination. Somewhere within that tapestry may rest the original memory that later generations would come to know as Nibiru, not necessarily as a lost planet, but perhaps as a forgotten place, a sacred crossing, a remarkable civilization, or a symbol whose deepest meaning still waits to be fully understood. Chapter 8. The Surviving Hypothesis. Are myths the memories of humanity's last great world transition? And again, not debunking anybody else's past history with this. It does go into some interesting things. Okay. Every historical investigation eventually reaches a crossroads where the available evidence no longer provides complete answers. At that point, the role of the investigator is not to invent certainty, but to construe reasonable hypotheses. It can be tested against archaeology, geology, genealogy, comparative mythology, and the historical record. This workbook reaches the crossroads here. As I follow my family's documented ancestral lineage backward through preserved genealogy records, I discovered that it converged with some of the oldest names preserved within Mesopotamian tradition. That discovery did not answer my question. It created entirely new ones. Rather than asking whether these ancient figures were purely mythical, I began asking whether the lineage itself might represent one surviving thread connecting the modern world to humanity's earliest remembered past. This shift fundamentally changes the investigation. Instead of beginning with the assumption that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrials, I began asking a different question altogether. What if the oldest myths are humanity's attempt to remember the survivors of the last great world traditions or transitions? What if mythology is a collection of imaginative stories, but a library of compressed historical memories passed from one generation to the next until the original events became inseparable from sacred traditions? Modern geology provides a remarkable starting point. At the conclusion of the last galactic maximus, approximately 12,000 years ago, the Earth underwent profound environmental changes. Vast continental ice sheets melted as global temperatures increased. Sea levels rose by thoroughly 120 meters, permanently drowning enormous coast plains that had once been inhabited. Rivers changed their courses as landscapes were reshaped. Earthquakes and volcanoes activity altered regions altogether under environmental stress. Entire coastlines disappeared beneath advanced seas, forcing human populations to migrate inland or seek refuge in new territories. None of these events are matters of speculation. They are well documented through geology, paleoclimatology, and archaeology. The mystery begins only after those facts. If entire coastal civilizations were displaced by rising oceans, where did their people go? History often focused upon the disappearance of cities, but civilizations are not simply buildings. When a city falls, its inhabitants rarely vanished with it. They migrate, they establish new settlements, they marry into neighboring communities, they carry with their technologies, agricultural knowledge, navigational skills, religious traditions, languages, and most importantly, their memories. Every generation inherits stories explained where their ancestors came from and why they left their original homeland, long before writing existed. Those memories survive through oral tradition. Perhaps this is where mythology truly begins. Imagine communities of survivors settling along the great river valleys after generations of migration. Their descendants would remember lands now lying beneath the sea, rivers that once flowed differently, and ancestors who guided them through unimaginable catastrophe. As centuries became millennia, those remembered leaders would naturally assume larger roles within the stories. The founders who organized communities, preserved knowledge, or established laws could gradually become reversed as more than ordinary people. History would become remembered, remembrance would become tradition, tradition would become mythology. From this perspective, another possibility emerges. What if Apsu and Tiamat were originally remembered not as supernatural beings descending from another world, but as symbolic ancestral founders whose identities became inseparable from the environment they represented? One community may have been defined by the freshwater rivers that sustained agriculture and settlement. Another may have been a maritime people whose survival depended upon the sea. After surviving environmental catastrophe, these communities could have encountered one another, exchanged knowledge, formed alliances, and eventually laid the foundation for new civilizations. Over countless generations, the rivers and seas that sustained those people became inseparable from the names of the ancestors who led them. The symbols remained long after the historical details had faded. This interpretation is, by its very nature, a historical reconstruction. It does not claim that the surviving Mesopotamian tablets explicitly describe such events. Rather, it asks whether archaeology, environmental history, genealogy, and mythology might preserve different pieces of the same forgotten story, like assembling a shattered mosaic. Its discipline contributes a fragment. No single piece reveals the complete picture, but together they may begin to illuminate patterns that remain invisible when studied in isolation. The same question naturally extends to some of history's greatest mysteries. Could traditions surrounding Atlantis preserve memories of coastal civilizations lost beneath rising seas? Could Proto-Sumerian communities have inherited knowledge from earlier populations displaced by environmental catastrophe? Could maritime peoples remembered by later civilizations have become the distant ancestors of the Phoenicians and other seafaring cultures? Could sacred places such as Dilmun preserve echoes of real location transformed by changing coastlines? And what if the ancient word Nibiru referred not to another inhabited planet, but to a crossing, a passage, or even the remembered homeland of a people whose world no longer exists above the sea? None of these questions can yet be answered with certainty. Yet history repeatedly demonstrates that yesterday's mythology sometimes becomes tomorrow's archaeology. The ruins of Troy were once dismissed as fiction until excavation proved otherwise. Ancient cities buried beneath volcanic ash, desert sands, and dense jungles have emerged after centuries of being regarded as legends. Underwater archaeology continues to discover submerged settlements that remind us how much of humanity's earliest history now rests beneath the ocean. It is within that context that my own family's lineage assumes significance. I do not present it as a solitary proof capable of resolving every unanswered question surrounding Mesopotamia or humanity's earliest civilizations. Rather, I present it as one line of evidence that incites further investigation. If preserved, genealogy converged with ancient historical traditions in unexpected ways. They deserve to be examined alongside archaeological discoveries, geo, geo, geo I'm like killing these words, geological evidence, linguistic studies, and comparative mythology rather than being dismissed before the investigation begins. The purpose of this workbook is therefore not to persuade the reader to accept a predetermined conclusion. It is to ask better questions. The central question is not whether aliens came from Nibiru. The central question is whether humanity has forgotten chapters of its own history. Perhaps the oldest creation stories are not describing visitors from another world at all. Perhaps they are describing our own ancestors struggling to rebuild after one of the greatest environmental transformations our planet has ever experienced. If that possibility contains even a fragment of truth, then mythology becomes something far more profound than fantasy. It becomes humanity's oldest surviving memory, preserved through symbols until archaeology, geology, genealogy, and history are finally able to examine those memories together. As this investigation continues, every new discovery, whether found in an ancient king list, a submerged archaeological site, a geological survey, or a preserved family lineage, becomes another fragment of a story that may still be waiting to be reconstructed. The greatest mystery may not be whether these civilizations existed, but whether enough pieces of their memory still survive for us to recognize them. Chapter 9, Opening the Elite Door, a reconstruction that stays inside the evidence. Upon the elite door and spilling the tea, if modern astronomy cannot confirm a roaming planet called Nibiru, then perhaps the real mystery is not in the sky at all, but deep within Earth's own forgotten history. My research has carried me through secret space program websites, NASA archives, and even Burnham's Celestial Handbook in search of a documented planet X. Each time I came away with the same result. No convincing scientific evidence that the Sumerians were describing a hidden world that periodically invades the inner solar system. Yet the myths remain, and so do my family's genealogical records that trace an unbroken line back to the age of Enlil. If the planet never materialized, what did the ancient members One answer, wait. If the planet materialized, what did the ancient member, I don't know why I did that.
Remember.
One may lie in an older terrestrial story, an echo of survivors who rebuilt after the last great climate upheaval. Without invoking extraterrestrial, we can reconstruct the deepest layer of the Mesopotamian tradition as a tale of catastrophe, migration, and rebirth. Ice Age ends, massive flooding, and then a coastal people's migration inland. New civilizations form between the Tigris and Euphrates. Old memories become sacred stories. Primordial waters, Apsu and Tiamat, first cosmic ancestors. Sky and earth become separated. Heavenly authority, Anu. Ordinary civilizations, Enlil. Temple government, and the Council of Gods, which is now called the Anunnaki. In the model, Apsu and Tiamat are not aliens spiraling in from deep space. They are mythic personifications of the inundated landscapes, the endless freshwater flood, and the encroaching salt sea that shapes the lives of the earliest settlers, their children. The later gods dramatize humanity's long transition from undifferentiated nature to measure societies, written law, and royal authority. When the Sky Father Anu lifts the heavens away from the Earth Mother, Kasar, the poem is retelling an age-old human achievement, distinguishing season stars and calendars from the chaotic world of storm and flood. When Enlil organizes irrigation canals and temple taxes, the myth is describing the birth of city government. Why compare myths across civilizations? Historians and comparative mythologists now ask whether the Sumerian story is only one voice in the much older chorus. Egypt begins with the flood ocean called Nun. Genesis opens with darkness over the deep. Greek poets recall the yawning gap called chaos. Hindu seers speaks of an endless cosmic ocean. Set beside the Mesopotamian genealogy, Apsu, Tiamat, Lamu, Lahamu, Ansar, Kisar, Anu, Enlil, and Egyptian, Hebrew, Greek, and Indic narratives look less like borrowed fiction and more like parallel memories of real climate trauma, reshaped by each cultural landscape. Archaeological discoveries of Göbekli Tepe and other pre-pottery Neolithic sanctuaries revealed organized ritual societies already thriving millennia before cuneiform tablets. These tablets speak of the religious imagination born long before writing, the very imagination that would later turn ancestral memories into the cosmic dramas we read on clay tablets. Questioning the missing planet. Modern Nibiru cataclysm. Theories beginning with Nancy Leader's Zeta Talk posting in 1995 and recycled through every apocalyptic headline since predict or wandering planet that never arrives. Astronomers project such claims as pseudoscience, noting that any Jupiter-sized intruder on a short period orbit would have destabilized the solar system long ago. Real Planet 9 searches focus on bodies far beyond Neptune, worlds so distant they cannot threaten Earth or explain Mesopotamian myth. If the astronomical evidence offers only silence, the research must look elsewhere. To geology, to submerged coastlines, to oral memory, and yes, to royal genealogies that might still encode fragments of prehistoric migrations. Where did the people come from? That single question haunts every world reset scenario. Civilizations do not simply vanish, their buildings crumble, but their people move on. They marry into new communities, carry tools, knowledge seeds, languages and stories over centuries. Those stories compress into symbols, fresh water and salt water birthing the gods, a sky king measuring the winds, a council of elders ratifying the new world. The more profound the catastrophe, the more cosmos the memory becomes. The comparative test. The next investigative step is clear. Set the Mesopotamian text beside Egyptian cosmogonies. I don't even know. These words are important, but I can't say them. Cosmogonies. Okay, we're just going to go on. The Genesis prologue, the Vedic hymns, and the carved pillars of Göbekli Tepe identify which elements repeat across cultures. Primordial waters, cosmic separation, flood survivors, and which remains unique. That comparison can help separate universal human symbolism from local historical detail and expose where genuine cultural contacts or shared ancestral experiences might lurk. In other words, it is the most productive way to fill the historical gaps without turning speculation into dogma. My reason for this reconstruction goes deeper than many texts are willing to explore. If the secret space archives, NASA's data sets, astronomical catalogs, and other repositories of forbidden knowledge cannot place Nibiru in a measurable orbit, then perhaps the most promising ground of inquiry lies underwater, in drowned valleys, sunken plains, and the oldest layers of human memory preserved as myth. That said, I do not rule out the possibility that Nibiru represents a portal realm, a threshold access through stargates, inner Earth passages, or celestial alignment glimpses only in visionary accounts. Nearly every tradition in modern UFOlogy speaks of the intelligences who travels between worlds, dimensions, or states of being until decisive evidence emerges, whether of the wandering planet, a gateway beyond the ice wall, or a pocket dimension. The planetary visitor hypothesis remains unconvincing noise. The real mystery may be much closer, excuse me, they're hitting me, to home, waiting beneath the silt of ancient stories and encoded within the ancestral stories we have yet to understand. Now, so that's the end of part 2. I do have part 3, but I'm not going to start it today. In the book, I have put the actual location of Nibiru, but it is written in their language. Anyways, if you had a map and it's those lines, those numbers at the top and on the side, the bottom, and the left, I have those. The coordinates. So I do have the coordinates of Nibiru. I was able to transcribe them out of one of the tablets that are presented in the Forbidden Knowledge. And number 3 actually describes how that planet or whatever it is comes in and how the Anunnaki are born here. Because before Enlil, it was just the primordial gods. So, meaning those guys came from a civilization that died. Now, Nibiru, from my understanding, to give you a little bit of excitement for the next one, Nibiru seems to come around after the resets. So that could lie somewhere with the movie, and Rusty, I know you'll like this, Jupiter Ascending, or it could mean something completely different altogether. Because I actually also, according to the source codes, have around the exact date Nibiru is going to reappear. So I'm pretty excited for that. I do have that in book 3, but we will continue that probably not next week, because I would like to have Jack, Rusty, possibly Rob, on a call, and because he has a lot of experience on his timeline in regards to different timelines of the Anunnaki. And I think they're quite fascinating since we're all on this adventure. So I'll open it up to Q&As. Everybody go ahead and ask the questions you want. I'm not going to give the third book away because it's very fascinating. And I'm almost done with it. I still have a few more things to add in. But yeah, so anybody have any questions?
I do have a question, and I'm going to ask that with the Nibiru looking like it's a Jupiter ascending. Is it a portal system that people go in and out? I mean, because this morning I had a whole, conversation. I don't know who I'm talking to, but where I did a video on it where, like, I questioned myself for some reason when I go to these realms or when I jump and I don't like the situation, I just go, I'm out. And so it's from Ragnarok. It's one of the Thor movies where they just go right through the system and they go out. I mean, I just wake up in my bed. So I went into like a rabbit hole kind of situation where I'm like, wait a minute, all this is connecting to all these Avatar movies and everything like that. So my big question would be, will it actually change for everybody, or are there a certain amount of people that will be getting these hits? Because that's what I only feel at this very moment, because people are in trauma right now.
Well, I don't think it'll be more traumatic. It just depends on how people handle transition. Um, Again, when the timelines have merged in the past, it was traumatic. Lots of people died. It was literally like worlds crashing into each other, and then whoever survived the merging, that was what it was. That's why the resets were so devastating, if you were. It depends on the planet, and since we're a multi-dimensional planet, and we hear how the quote-unquote elites survived by going into dimensional portals or other worlds or underground cities, they were able to escape. There's another movie called His Dark Materials, which actually shows them going into other timelines, but it's really the same thing. Like, you'll literally run into yourself there, kind of thing. I don't know how to describe that movie, but it resonated with me when jumping through different timelines. And then you fall in as a time walker. But we don't need a knife to cut through time anymore. So, or the veils of the different timelines. But how it affects somebody is each individual person. A lot of people had bad experiences with the Anunnaki, and like Jack and the people that were involved in that. I have never had a bad experience as of right now that I know of with the Anunnaki. Mine was more the Imperials, which are above the Anunnaki, celestial wise. So they're from outer space, like outer galactic, out of our galaxy kind of thing. So, and mine was more in the future. So my job was to see what future we were going into, and it was devastating. And I talked about it in my first seminar, because I have 700 years of Earth's future history, the actual history books that they wrote in the future. I got access to those, and we were under the government of Asiatica, and our world, Earth, has grown into a mega Earth or super planet, whatever. It was huge, massive, but the population of beings was 1.3 million, and this was only 700 years into the future. So what happened between this time and that time was a blur to me. So because I had jumped from being a child, like most people in the space program, into the future, and it was interesting because I was on this planet in the future, and we did have a lot of like cyber upgrades physically. But we were also free from the bonds in the 3D, so we had our powers. But if you were from here at this time and you went into any kind of future program, they literally put devices in the back of your neck. So if you tried to escape or go back into the past, like that movie Adam, I don't know if you guys have seen that, where he jumps back into the past to try to change something. And talks to his child self. They put those in there to prevent us from doing that, especially time walkers. So I just had to deal with Imperials, and transport and protecting like new planets, mineral planets, for harvesting. But there wasn't people on it. It was a metal harvesting. So they would get the minerals from a new planet. And go from there. Oh my God, there's deer fighting in my front yard, right next to the propane tank. Man, I hope they don't hit that. See, we're talking about destruction, and all of a sudden deer are in there fighting. Good question, Ressie. But that's my perspective of it from what the heavens and the Creator God councils told me. It's we're transitioning. We're not colliding. Um, and that's why we were told to just, in nice ways, chill out. Sit back and let the transition happen. But there are going to be your state and Masonic actors that are going to try to riot people because they're very good at it, and they don't want the 3D to transition without their secret societies into the 5D. So they're desperately trying to have people manifest fear so that they can keep their secret societies in the 5D. But most of humanity has already got the energy from the earth, celestial, past lives, and just from waking up in their DNA and their experiences in the space programs, whether a 2-year jump or a 20 or 100-year jump. The body remembers. So therefore, when your mind is able to unlock those decompartmentalizational traumas in your head, you start remembering and you start putting the pieces together. But you won't lose those memories. Those are your timelines, and that's why it was important to share them. And that's how history remembers that there's more than one timeline. Does that make sense?
Yeah, which is always a question. Like, is it a Mandela effect? Where I was like, did that happen? Did that not happen?
Right.
I mean, is that anything to do with that? Yeah, because to me, I'm like, oh, that's deja vu. Oh, wait, did that change? So to me, I'm constantly in my, in that system. I'm like, am I listening to this? Is it happening, or did I jump the timeline?
Right. And you can actually jump into several timelines that might be on the same sequence, just differently. Like, you might be a leader of the Anunnaki instead of the slave, right? Or you might be the wife of one of them. You know what I mean? There's these different timelines, and some of them run parallel. Some of them run in between other timelines where the Anunnaki aren't even a thing. There was the ancient Phoenicians. There was, Avalon and stuff like that. These things have come and gone as well. So again, we can allow the elites to isolate it to their timeline, like, oh, this is our tradition, you guys belong to us. And then we have evidence of it in everybody's genes because of the breeding sequence. But really, it's just an evolutionary thing that unfortunately got hit by war. So when war happens, it's because the earth needs to reset in some way. And not just the earth, but the other dimensional realms. I will give it away, though. I do say we are a dimensional planet. We are also a dimensional galaxy. So part 3 goes into that because I just found out, and it has a lot to do with Nibiru. So, and it answers a lot of questions of what's going to fall on the permanent timeline, because again, the permanent timeline is based on many timelines that have to come together, and then that's where it's all going to make sense, because we all carry a piece of the puzzle. My timeline wasn't Jack's timeline, and your timeline's not my timeline, but we all had an experience with these people, whether brief for a long time or more upfront, right? So my last physical appearance here was 75,000 years ago. Every time that I had tried to be born in between that, I was murdered inside, the woman carrying me, or more sacrificed shortly after being born because of my type of energy. I'm a messenger. So messengers, there's usually some kind of catastrophic event that happens after the messenger is born. So in a way, in their historical, tablets, they try to snuff out the messengers. So because we start horrific things. So when I was supposed to be born in 54 AD, I was brought here instead, because I remember 5 timelines where my mother in that timeline was murdered, so by the Templars. And then the one where they said she had a false pregnancy was the saving timeline. And then she was able to produce more heirs for this earth
Hi, Mary,
Oh,
I want to ask a question.
oh, go ahead.
Um, I reach as far as going back to my lineage, but every time I put in my grandmother and grandfather's name, but they want your birthday and they're not moving forward. So is there some kind of blockage because I don't know it?
Because you don't know their birth dates.
Right. They want to know when they died and want to know their birthday. And I don't have that information. So then how can I even I could only go up to where um my mother is then. Because they're not
It
allowing me.
you can sometimes you can get away with just putting about the year, like, oh, they were born about this time. So if
Yeah, but I don't
you're,
know what time, I don't know what year they're born. I have no idea what year they were
well, I
born.
know. So what you do is if your mother said her mother died when she was 67, let's say, then you would go about 67 years back from, because usually women will give birth, in their 20s.
Right.
I was I was a procrastinator. I waited till I was in my 30s. But there's a
Don't
few of
worry
those.
about it.
So just use a calculator. I've had to do that. I actually got back to the Jesus 12 bloodline by doing that because we do have the Christ bloodline in my family tree. And there was one of Jesus's 12's children that had fled from Switzerland. I would say, I'm trying to think, maybe 100 years ago. And he's a he's a cousin. He married my grandpa's mother. He was the third husband, but he's registered literally like as a first or second cousin so many times removed. So I don't know how that happened, but it the name over time was changed to Christ, Christ, because he was hiding from, and it said it in the thing, he was hiding from the black nobility. So I was like, whoa. So the answers and all these puzzles and keys are literally in our ancestral recordings. And that's how the Vatican knows everything about us. And not just the Vatican, but the Templars and all the priests, because they have our family's history. When they went in to destroy kingdoms and palaces and manors and stuff like that, they would extract the most important documents, which would be the land deeds, certificates of bloodlines, stuff like that, because they wanted to find out who the heirs were. So if anybody stepped forward, they could attempt to control that person first. And that happens from, again, what I'm seeing in every reset. That's why they keep the children and kill off the parents. And then we have these train full of kids, or maybe back then boats full of kids and being adopted. The Native Americans, same thing. If you were marrying age, the women were given as brides to the soldiers, or any kind of, made man, or they were brought in as slaves, whatever. And then the children were adopted into the white families if they did not participate in the reservations. And again, all this is literally in the London archives about the American history. And why that is because the king at that time of the resettlement of America and the Civil War, or the war with the Indians, they had to send a monthly courier to give updates to the king of what was going on in America. Because obviously he didn't have TV back then, so he couldn't just watch the news. They didn't have telephones, so they had all these recorded documents from generals, um, what we know now as the founding fathers. All those guys were documenting the historical takeover, what Indians, what tribes, who was doing what. They even labeled each, Indian, they gave them numbers, stuff like that. And that was even way before, the roll accounting came in. So when one country comes in to conquer another, the truth is actually hidden in that country because they have to give a progress report of their advancements or their failures. Like how many soldiers died, who died, whose family do we have to inform? It's no different than today. There was just more of an accounting on paper. So that's where these books and stuff come in of our family lineage. So if you want to know anything about the Native Americans and the resettlement, it's in the London archives. So literally found a ton of stuff there. And that's how I found that I have over 17 Native bloodlines and over 20 clans. So it's like insane and how they erased everything.
Maybe
So I have
you put a link for the American archives. I mean, the London archives.
Huh?
Can you put a link for the archives?
Yeah, I can try to see if I can look it up.
All right, thanks.
If you do look up the Native American lineage, it may trigger some things. It did with mine, but because I'm heavily protected, they didn't come after me. They just went after my account. So they messed with my the what is it called? The family ancestry pedigree account. And how they did it was they manipulated my tree. Like somebody went in and edited my personal tree to make it look like the ancestors merged into another family. And I'm like, that is not my family. I've been doing this for years. I know damn well who the first, 10 people are in each branch. So you just got to watch out for that. They'll mess with your family lineage. So to make it seem like you don't belong to those families.
really annoys me
I would
and
say before
cracks
you
me
go
up.
digging into the London archives, or any archives around the world, because they're all public, you can go onto them. The ones that aren't public are called the halls of knowledge. So those are the ones that, it's a payment for lading. They want something, usually your soul in return, to go to those places. Because once you know the truth of things, you're at risk at telling people. So yeah, the archives are public. It does depend, especially now that they have the technology to ping anybody looking up a certain thing. Then yeah, the only experience I got was that they were messing with my timeline, my tree, my family tree. So I had to go back there and change it. And then they restricted me from certain logon points, like Shannon and Lisa and other people can go into areas and find their roll numbers, and I couldn't because I was literally banned from it. And it says it, you are banned from looking at this stuff in the American one. I'm like, oh my God.
Wait, you said to get familysearch.org first?
Yeah, because you're going to log in.
And then build your tree, then go to the pedigree.com.
Yeah. You can go to pedigree.com and you're going to see your lineage, but unless you've done some type of treaty of peace, they don't open it for you. So again, you can do mine, you can do anybody else's exit plan, but they don't open the lineage until, because a lot of times, again, they like to control your lineage. And just tell you you're famous because you're related to Hercules. But if you know Hercules in the 3D sense, he's a demigod. But on my lineage, he's literally a god. He's born from two gods. And his grandfather or great grandfather is Zeus. So there you go, a fallen angel. And that bloodline was used for nothing but war. Like war after war after war. Not the Rockefellers or the Rothschilds, but they came in with another family that pretty much runs the trains in the United States, but it starts with an A.
Vanderbilt? The Vanderbilts?
Is it the Vanderbilt? Might be the Vanderbilt. Yeah, they're like my second cousins. Now I know who the handler is.
Yeah, they started at ships, then they got rid of their ships, and then they went to trains.
Yeah, so I'm related to two of those guys. They're both passed away, but I'm literally blocked from knowing the offspring. So, and your direct handlers are your second cousins, like first and second cousins that you don't even know exist. They know everything about you because they have to control your estates. But that's my usurper. So, and then they're under the royal usurper, which right now would be Charles. So, since I took a claim to the crown in 2024, early 2024. So he's not a sitting king. He's called a Stuart king right now. And that's, I don't know if anybody watched his inauguration where he got mad as he was reading the contract. And then he threw his pen and got up and started yelling. And they immediately went to commercial because I was watching it. I don't know why I was watching it. I don't normally watch it, but the heavens wanted me to watch it. And I saw that and I was like, huh, I wonder what that contract says. But then I was told later it was because he's not the sitting king. So he's not a legitimate king. Whatever happened before Queen Elizabeth died, she made it to where they were only Stuarts. Because again, the world is looking for the rightful heirs. And all those guys are going to be replaced. So if they're not already. So they get their season finale right now. In like the Britain reels, because I'm on some groups in TikTok that put the news, like European news and stuff. Yeah. Yep. Nope, they can't. We can only let them expose themselves. So even if you have to run through the mock court, you just anything you can and say, Your Honor, will and is going to be held against you in a higher court of law. Good luck.
Exactly.
Put your name
Exactly.
on those documents, please, because I want them to know who did this.
The truth is no longer held prisoner by those who wish to control the narrative.
Right. Yep. It's gonna be fun.
It's gonna be an interesting ride. I don't see it getting worse in a way, but it's going to get a lot more kookier, for lack of a better term. It's going to get like sci-fi fantasy kind of hybridization of reality, because as the true nature of who and what we are starts to be remembered, not just individually but collectively, that's gonna be an interesting ride.
The truth of being a multiracial planet, not just in race of humans, but other beings, is going to be accepted again. Because before Atlantis fell, I mean, we were multi extraterrestrial, other planets. It didn't matter. We had other beings living among humans as well. So it's not going to be just humans. The masks can come off, the illusions can be put down, the veils will be lifted, and like I said, be humble because you may have married a reptilian and had kids and didn't know it.
And all of that is a distinct possibility, because you're right. We were a multi-dimensional, multi-species hub of the galaxy. Yep. Yeah. Not just the galaxy, on a cosmological scale. And then as we fell into forgetting, in order to protect the system, in order to protect all of the other systems that are attached to us, they had to segregate humanity for the protection of the systems that hadn't fallen into a state of forgetting. Right. So we really became isolated.
But they can't do it without our free will, so we allowed it, unfortunately.
We did. But as I'm coming to understand what actually transpired, I understand that it wasn't really done out of malice. It turned into something malicious. But originally it was not done out of malice. We volunteered to do it so that the source, the infinite consciousness, could truly and profoundly understand what it meant to have a individuated, free-willed, first-hand point of view experience.
Kind of. It was actually through malice, but the deception came from the Monday, which are the archons and the non-magical beings, and they somehow were put in charge of the Ark of the Covenant. They were the last to rule over the Ark of the Covenant. The bad thing about that is that gave them access to everybody's information. So that's how they went after each magical species, because of their karmic debt. Because when the karmic debt that we were supposed to have down here, if you were a magical being of any type, was that you were reborn, and you were reborn without magic because you abused your powers or whatever it was. So anyways, so when the Monday got a hold of it, they learned how to protect themselves by using our powers against us. And that's why we still have witches and warlocks. But if you imagine the structure of a noble, let's use the the wizarding and the mage world. You had your hierarchies, and they were in the heads of the families, and then you had the ones at the lowest end of the family that weren't bright or smart but still had some power. What the Monday did is they went to those guys and tricked them into betraying their families. So that's why it's within the family, and it's an illegitimate family bloodline, because they took, I don't want to say the word loser of the family, but it's definitely not the highest, most intelligent, most accomplished individual of the family. Does that make sense? It's the ones that didn't really have strong enough powers, and whatever it was. And they turned on their own people, because you can only infiltrate any type of magical family from within. It has to be somebody that was already in the family, or a servant or something that was close enough to get to the heads, the most powerful people. So, and that's what the whole thing is with Harry Potter. It shows that, only the wizarding world can infiltrate each other, but they did it through family or close friends to
No,
take
that
down
actually
that.
makes sense.
So we all had powers, and I come from the angel bloodline. I still have energy from certain angelic bloodlines. Lilith is also an angel, so she was part of the seeding along with two other females of whatever their abilities were. I can look them up and see what their abilities were, but Lilith was a seeder, so therefore she had a right to be here. She could birth like 100 children, because it says her and Adam had 100 children a day. But to an angel, a day is 1,000 years. So how old was Adam really? And did he start aging after they were kicked out of Eden? Same thing with Avalon. Avalon was the same thing. That was an angel seeding. And it disappears just like Eden does. These places are still here. They're just dimensionally protected. And unless you have a pure heart, you can't get into it. So that's what they teach you in the forbidden knowledge. Those dimensional kingdoms that we long for are here. They're everywhere. You can walk right past it in one of those other countries, or here, even the ones here. I live in, the county of El Dorado. So where's that golden city at? Is it hidden in the forest up here? Because El Dorado in California is massive, and it's restricted forest lands. So that tells you
There
something,
are
right?
no empty spaces. But that's because
Right.
there's only the here. There is only here. That's it. That's all that exists, is right here. Everything exists within a different level of frequency or awareness that we can access or we cannot. And like Mary said, if you don't have a pure heart, or your intentions aren't of the highest order, you're not getting there, because those realms are protected from the forgetting.
Right. Yep. And you have to come in peace. You have to let the material possessions go, because they've dealt with people like, the Hitler saga of, Hitler, not the reptilian Hitler clone, whatever. He infiltrated the gate, and he started war out on the outer ring of our ice wall. So I have the maps of those. But again, it was a reptilian one, and they had to subdue it, and that's why the transport to come out of our world is more difficult, out of the outside wall. Like, you literally have to let everything go to ascend, because of what he did, and his Nazi Aryans, which we know were a reptilian species, not from here, from the Delta Quadrant, caused chaos in, the ascended lands outside of our ice wall. So
Yeah, falling is easy. Climbing back out is the challenge.
right. So, all right. Well, I'll let you guys go. I know that I got to start barbecuing and getting stuff ready. So I hope you guys have a happy 4th of July and stay safe. And
It was good hearing you, Mary. I hope you're well. And I will talk to you when I talk to you.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Happy 4th, everybody. Thanks again, Mary. I'll talk to you soon.